everybody, and welcome to this online launch of the digital exhibition Ensnared, the Inescapable Reality of Fatigue. It's my absolute privilege to have you here today to talk about this exhibition. So to start us off, I'd like to invite Dr. Anna Kuppuswamy to turn her camera on and join us. Anna was the lead researcher on the project, and she will be talking today about why this project was conceived in the first place.
Hi everyone, thank you, Cassie. This is just a fantastic day for me because more than 5 years ago, when I started my research project into understanding mechanisms of post-stroke fatigue, the first thing I needed to look into was how do I measure post-stroke fatigue in stroke survivors? And that was quite an enlightening moment because I was just bombarded with a whole load of questionnaires, lots of different statements, and stroke survivors were invited to rate these different statements. But at the end of the day, it gives you a measure of how tired you are. However, it didn't give me any insights into what might be causing fatigue. And to understand what might cause fatigue, I needed to have a much more in-depth, not necessarily first-hand experience, but a different instrument, a different tool to understand what it is that stroke survivors were referring to when they said they were suffering from fatigue, so that we as scientists can generate hypotheses and ideas about where fatigue might be coming from. So that's when I realized that the current instruments for measuring fatigue was quite limited, and the purpose of these instruments were very different. And I needed to find other ways of understanding fatigue so that we can generate hypotheses that can be tested. So that's when, and we anyway started using these questionnaires, started interacting with stroke survivors and started doing experiments in the lab. And one-to-one conversations resulted in the understanding that verbal communication of the experience of fatigue was quite limiting. So that's when the idea of having an arts engagement project where we had a different method of expressing how someone felt when they said they suffered from fatigue. So we thought we needed non-verbal forms of communicating the experience of fatigue so that it was better understood by people who did not experience it firsthand, and also we could develop more ideas about what sort of experiments to perform to gather evidence in terms of the underlying mechanisms of fatigue. And that's how this whole project started. So well, that's really the origins of the project. And then we invited Sophie to join us to develop this arts engagement project.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I'd now like to invite Sophie, who was the artistic director on the project and has done an incredible job bringing all of these different aspects together to talk through the process and also the artworks. Thanks, Sophie.
Hi, Cassie. Thank you, Anna. It's been an extraordinary journey over the last 18 months to be where we are today. We obviously intended originally to launch the project with a live event back in September, October last year. And because of the pandemic, I found myself needing to develop different methods and different ways of working. And I sort of adapted a methodology that I've been using, which is a sort of series of quite, I wouldn't say simplistic, but they're very accessible sort of ways of thinking about creativity. And I asked, if we could go on to the next, I asked everybody to explore the idea of a colour. And so if fatigue was a colour, what colour would it be? And oh yes, so we sort of go back. So in the workshop process, we started off by exploring the whole sort of narrative around sort of colour and a series of writing exercises. And I also did a sort of a portrait exercise. And in the portrait exercise, I asked people to shut their eyes, and we actually did this in a workshop this morning, to shut their eyes and to create a self-portrait of themselves with their eyes shut. And I'm going to show you sort of very quickly this sort of some of the processes that came out of that. So the first one was that this is sort of quite a normal figurative piece that that the participant sort of showed how her leg had changed because of the stroke and how her body felt in a fatigued form. And then these are the two very interesting realizations of how somebody's portrait. The series of balls on the right of our screen is this idea that somebody be feeling very discombobulated and was having to learn to re-piece herself back together again. And so she created this sort of analogy or a portrait of this sort of balls being put back together again. And then the other image is of the manifestation of the stroke and the fact that the participant's leg wasn't moving properly, and it became almost like her hair, which was this sort of out of kilter sort of energy, and it went through into the into her leg and to her movement. And so this was just one. So I was really trying very hard to find ways of adapting and for myself understanding what the possibilities of fatigue were. So if we go on to the next slide. So during the pandemic, I sort of asked everybody to write sort of and explore metaphors, and one of them sort of was a metaphor as though if fatigue was an animal, what animal would it be? And in this situation, it was the hippo, which was a sort of slumbering, slow, lethal creature crushing you within its jaws. And the participant created this beautiful embossed panel. So I'd screen printed MRI slices of brains, and then we sort of turned them into this piece. And if fatigue was the sound of interference on the radio, a confused mess of noise, unable to tune into the correct station. So there was this sort of, as we sort of explored these narratives and we did these workshops, I began to get a sense of how fatigue was affecting the workshop participants. And this is very interesting that whereas we think of fatigue as being sort of grey and overcast and heavy, some people were also experiencing it as very bright, neon green, sharp and quite unnatural in terms of colour. And then the sort of culmination of this has been a series of sort of sample panels that you can see in more detail on the website later, but it's sort of, I began to bring together everybody's voices and their text in their sort of printed form. However, that didn't really feel like it did justice to the nuances and complexity of fatigue. And as part of the original concept was to create a sort of site-specific installation piece that audiences could come into and they could experience the immersiveness of fatigue, and through artworks and through soundscapes. But obviously because of the pandemic, it meant that we couldn't actually realise that in a live form. So I began to explore other ways of working. And once we were allowed to work together, I worked with two extraordinary performers, Erica Poole and Robert Clark, alongside a photographer, Stephen King, to sort of manifest and make manifest some of these metaphors for people. So fatigue is a boned corset binding you up and leaving you breathless without movement. An uncomfortable bed, offering no rest or relaxation, uninviting, but you have no choice other than to lie down in it. Tied up in a sheet that you cannot escape. A sparrowhawk appearing from nowhere, swooping down, grabbing its prey, leaving a wake of devastation and trauma. A swarm of locusts, clouds of blackness, appearing from nowhere, overwhelming, devastating. A bulbous, earth-covered celery root, concealing a bright, fresh interior, desperate to escape. Fatigue is a humid, drenching electrical storm, overwhelming, unpredictable. I get up, shower, get dressed, and have to lay down again. This sort of sense of the reality of living with fatigue was something that through the creative workshops and through the participants' generosity and sharing very difficult narratives, I began to sort of piece together a sort of series of artworks, which obviously the photographs as such, and Deluged is another sort of series of photographs that have been animated to give a different energy to this experience. So the photographs and the text, which all are sort of participants' narratives and writing and ideas, I began to sort of piece together. But one of the things that we did was over the sort of duration, there were two groups running, and one of the groups who we have 2 participants from today with us, we had this extraordinary conversation about sound and the effect of sound on somebody that experiences fatigue. And because we were on Zoom, and because that gave us the sort of ability to record the session, not in high quality, but with a sort of crackling, discombobulated quality that we've learnt to sort of survive through the process. We had this recording, and so working with a really extraordinary sound designer who I know, who's actually based in India, in Bombay or Mumbai, we created this sound piece which so it uses the soundscape but then adds voices and sound, well, adds the Zoom with, and then intercuts that with people's the sound and the manifestations of that. And I was interested in how this becomes, so if you were to imagine that we are not sitting looking at our computer screens, and we're not experiencing this through a webinar, but you walk into a darkened room and you see a series of slides, or you see a film of somebody who is showering, and that probably is in silence, and then alongside that there is this sort of narrative soundscape which is of people talking about their experience of fatigue. So this piece is 8 minutes long, so I sort of think it would be quite useful if you want to shut your eyes and just really listen to people's voices and allow yourself to become immersed in this conversation. Thank you.
When they provided me the piece of paper diagnosis, I had a traumatic brain injury, you know, I had tears in my eyes. I had a really hard time initially. The senior medical staff didn't necessarily believe me. This was a silent wound.
If we're talking about sounds, I'd say the worst thing for me is conversations. I can handle one person talking, but if I'm in a busy environment or in an office, there's just no way to filter out all the conversations, and I just, you can't pick out what's important and what's not. So I just, it's very, very tiring to be in a room with lots of people.
I don't know, people arguing on the radio, which is happening a lot at the moment, and my husband loves to listen to the news programmes, and I'm beginning now to just go, no, I'm going to put on The Lark Ascending or something in the morning and not have to listen to it. But that particular piece of music is very calming, and it sort of sorts me out for the day, really. Mishmash of sounds, but I'm fine with music that I like, and I'm really good with very calming music like that.
Music is definitely not a problem. I'd say I can cope with, and I really enjoy, really, really loud music. So it's not the volume of the sound that is the issue. It's something else, which is lots of things going on together. That's the problem. Lots of sounds together that I can't filter out.
I had my stroke on holiday in Corfu, and so I woke up and I'd had the stroke, so I didn't know what had happened. I guessed it was that. I was sort of taken directly I had to be driven by my brother, who lives there, to the hospital, which was quite a long way away. When we got to the hospital, it was just like a cacophony of sound. Everybody just, shouting and hollering. There's no sort of system. It was just kind of a lot of Greek being spoken, obviously.
Well, I was a big fan of the Sex Pistols, I have to say. I like classical music, and I have to say I like most music. But if it's not interrupted, if there's nobody talking when it's on, then yes, I can listen and enjoy music.
music. I didn't for a long time. I do like the sound of silence.
Noise, I don't like loud noises. David was saying, in groups of people, you are talking to somebody and then somebody else trying to butt in all the time, and a loud voice which is interrupting a conversation which I'm deeply engrossed in. Something that's really rattling.
Arguing on the radio.
I didn't know how to participate any longer. So when I woke my voice going on outside, I found myself Noise was very, very tricky to begin with. Any sort of cross conversation was hell for me. I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't know how to participate any longer. So with all those voices going on outside, I found myself becoming very silent, which is, you know, completely against my sort of natural characteristics. It was hard, and it was hard explaining to people that they couldn't have multiple conversations, that we just needed to try and have one. I hate restaurants and pubs and bars. It just doesn't work for me anymore.
So in terms of the actual silence, that's really what I look for. It's as important to me as sound. I have to seek it. I don't always find it. It comes to me, and then it's beautiful. So I don't really go looking for it too hard. And I just pray for silence.
On the bad days, I scramble, stumbling to the bathroom, clutching the walls. I have to use all my might to concentrate on letting go. The basics have become hard. Sometimes I sit on the floor in the shower as I don't have the strength to fight the water, but the heat helps to soothe, and the sound of running water is a comfort. If things get really desperate, you know, like a party and there's lots of people there, I will often take myself to the bathroom and just turn the tap on to just listen to running water.
As you probably know by now, my hobby is my vintage motorcycles. The sound which I do love to hear is when I used to just trundle through the countryside at a nice steady pace, 30 miles an hour, round the country lanes, under the trees. All you can hear is the noise of the engine, which is muted, but to me very relaxing because of where I am at that point in time.
To mix me with 6 other people who suffered strokes, because it used to be a completely unknown disease, really. It was the stroke bed at the end of the ward. That's where you died. Simple as that. Whereas now all this research, which hopefully in 10, 15, 30 years other people will benefit from, is very encouraging. We won't, unfortunately, but at least our contribution. What's interesting is we all come from very different backgrounds. Yes, we are fully functioning brain people. Our brains are fully developed in our own way of environmentally being brought up, so that we still have that capacity. I think we've got to think beyond that and enjoy being, as Brian was saying earlier, enjoy being who we are, where we are.
Thank you, Sophie, for that, sharing those artworks. And I know some people have some issues with sound, so just to let you know that if you weren't able for some reason to be able to access those artworks, we will be sharing a link to the exhibition website very shortly, so you'll be able to go and look at those artworks and the other artworks that have been created in your own time. I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists to please turn their cameras on and join us. And while they do that, I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that this project was created as a way to further understand the multisensory nature of fatigue and to understand why, what it's like to live with fatigue, particularly post-stroke fatigue. I think that a lot of people do not understand. I must admit, I did not understand, and I will never fully understand. But this project has given me the opportunity to get a feel, and the artworks give you a feeling of what it's like to live with fatigue. And I realized that, we worked with a small group of people, so it won't reflect everyone's experiences, but it certainly, as we will hear, has reflected a number of people's experiences, and I hope that you found those pieces as powerful as we have. So I'm now going to ask each of our panelists that we have yet to hear from to please introduce themselves. So we might come to Sarah first.
Hello. I'm Sarah. I'm one of the stroke survivors that you heard with the writing and the images. So I was one of the participants of Sophie's beautiful artwork that she put together. I'm feeling a little bit emotional after all of that. Look, it was the most unbelievable project to be a part of. It made me feel not so alone and connected to people when you struggle to find words to explain how you're feeling. The fact that I had all these people around me that were putting how I felt into words that I could then take back to other people was amazing for me. It was a really, really beautiful project to have been a part of. Sorry, I'm so emotional. And I'm really proud of it.
So I think it's you should be proud of it, and I think that was what was so extraordinary, was people's generosity in amongst not only a really peculiar time, but also just that coming together and being very generous with each other's stories. And it's interesting reading the chat, because I can see that for some people it's quite painful, things being resurfaced. But just to reiterate what Cassie said, was that the intention of the project was to help illuminate the complexity of fatigue. And we can only do that by showing the honesty of it and the difficultness of it.
I found that it made me braver to have a voice again. And not be scared to try and get people to understand how I felt. And it made me feel not so alone anymore. And
I think it's fantastic for you to share that, Sarah. Thank you very much. Does David want to say anything? I can't see you, Dave.
Yeah, I'm a stroke survivor, and I was one of the participants too. Yeah, the whole project has been amazing for me, really. It sort of took me out of my comfort zone to start with. There were things that we had to do which I found difficult to put into words and to talk about, but being with 6 other stroke survivors, it really helped, and you didn't feel alone. I think fatigue is so difficult to talk about, even to my family and friends. It's been near impossible to try and explain what it feels like. So this project's sort of given me a way to explain it, and it's made me understand my fatigue more myself. So it's been a great thing to be involved in. But as Sarah said, it's been emotional as well at times. But it's been great. It's really been a good thing to do.
Yeah, thank you both Sarah and David, that's really appreciated. I'd now like to invite William to introduce himself and perhaps talk a little bit about his role and what he found in the project.
Hi everyone, hi Cassie. My name is William, so I'm a neuroscientist that has been working together with Anna for the last 5 years on trying to get a better understanding of what is the cause of fatigue after stroke. And I came into this, well, in 2016, when I started my research on fatigue. I had very little prior experience on what fatigue is like. And very quickly, I got to realize the importance and significance and how common a symptom it is after stroke. And my experience of fatigue beforehand was what most people tend to associate the term with fatigue as exercise-induced fatigue. You've done too much, rest, you'll recover. Where we know very clearly that the fatigue that the majority of stroke survivors experience is very, very different to what we call exercise-induced fatigue. So when we started studying fatigue, we were looking mainly at how movement is processed within the brain and how that might reflect stroke survivors' experience. And what a lot of stroke survivors tend to report is that movements feel a lot harder or a lot more effortful than what they did prior to the stroke. So when we first started, we were mainly focusing on movement and the perception of movement. But as we started this project, we got to realize very early on, when talking to stroke survivors and using the various artistic means that Sophie was using, is that it's not only related to movement, but it seems to be how the brain perceives information from your external surroundings. So it's something that came through very powerfully through the soundscape, specifically relating to sound and to vision. So what Anna said initially was we're trying to define fatigue and get a better understanding of what causes fatigue. And through these various workshops, this then informed our research. And then we started and have recently completed a number of studies to see how stroke survivors with fatigue process information related to vision within your surroundings, or how the brain processes auditory information, so sound within your surroundings. And that way, once we start to investigate this, we can get a better understanding of what might be the underlying cause of fatigue. And then going forwards, once we do that, then we can start far in the future. Well, we don't know when that will be, but hopefully develop interventions that might help reduce the severity of fatigue. So this project in itself has been very powerful in not only portraying what living with fatigue is like, but also informing the research and where we should be going in the future.
Thanks, William. Anna, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I must thank David and Sarah and all the participants of these workshops. Yes, it was quite a limited sample, but I think we have to start small, and I've been looking at the chat and it looks like a lot of people it resonates with, but in others it doesn't. So we need more information from people who are experiencing it, and this is only the beginning. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Sarah and David. And the other thing that I must highlight is a lot of people think about stroke as paralysis. You can you can see obvious deficits in movement, or obvious deficits in inability to speak, or other problems that are more visible, whereas stroke, post-stroke fatigue is probably one of the most hidden symptoms of stroke. And surprisingly, what we find is a lot of people who are almost fully recovered physically and cognitively are the ones who report very high levels of fatigue. So it makes it even worse. And what Sarah said about being alone, and I can totally see when you have a hidden disability, it makes it a lot more difficult to bring it out. And I'm so glad that it has helped some of our participants to actually help articulate the problem as well. So, thank you very much again for this. And like I said, it's only the beginning. So the other thing about moving on to how this project has influenced what it is that we do as scientists and where we should be going forward in terms of trying to understand the role of brain in perceiving this experience of fatigue. So when you talk to clinicians, doctors, neurologists, GPs, who are the first point of contact for a lot of the stroke survivors, they normally talk about, okay, so you're feeling fatigued, so maybe you should start thinking about, you should rest a little bit more. We know that rest is not restorative, and maybe it is secondary to depression, and maybe there is a mood problem, maybe you're not motivated enough. So these are the sort of common lines of thought of frontline clinical workers, not necessarily because they are ill-informed. It is just that because of a whole host of reasons, fatigue gets completely under the radar. And so the one thing that I quite definitively know that fatigue is not due to a problem of motivation. So pretty much all of the participants who have taken part in the workshops, and also research participants for our research studies, it's quite clear that fatigue is quite separate from lack of motivation. And so moving forward, trying to understand mechanisms of fatigue, the one thing we will not be studying is the neural basis of motivation being the neural basis of fatigue as well. There may be some shared mechanisms, but that doesn't mean that is the only mechanism. And maybe the primary driver is something that's quite independent. So that's one of the take-home messages for us as scientists going forward. And also just reflecting a little bit on the artworks that has given us some ideas is going back to the clay model that Sophie showed right at the beginning. The image of oneself is quite critical to how it is that people move and how it is that people process sensory information. So body imagery is quite altered in post-stroke fatigue, as we came to realize from these workshops, the clay models, where people have represented their body as being disproportionately large or small, or slightly different in the way they feel about their affected side. And mind you, these came from participants who did not have any explicit motor deficits. They were able to walk and move their arms and legs in exactly the same way as their unaffected side. So without any obvious deficit, there is still a change in body imagery, and that is something that has to be explored in relation to fatigue. So that's one thing that I think we should be taking forward as scientists, trying to investigate it. And the other thing about lights and colours, Sophie mentioned that when you think about fatigue, you think about, dull and depressing, and everything's just going. But however, some people experience the exact opposite. Everything is so overwhelming, and the colours they used to describe as much more on the other end of the spectrum, neon green, neon pink, and everything is shocking. So that talks to the idea that the perception of sensory information is altered, or in some ways it's exaggerated. I mean, normally the brain tends to process sensory information less when it is anticipating certain amount of sensory information. I'm sat here in this room and I can see the sun streaming through the window, but my brain is just suppressing it because that is irrelevant, and I don't want it to distract me from talking to people here. However, for someone where the brain is unable to suppress sensory information, it can be extra bright or extra everything. So I think that's the other thing, other line of inquiry that we're going to pursue in terms of how is sensory information being processed and how is it altered in people with post-stroke fatigue. And hopefully a few years down the line, we will have information in a controlled experiment in lots of stroke survivors to either confirm this hypothesis or to negate this hypothesis. So this has been such a fantastic project for us, both as people trying to understand the experience of fatigue, and also scientists trying to take forward this idea of what it is that underlies fatigue and what is the involvement of the brain, because we do know it's not an energy per se problem. So glucose levels are fine, the energy metabolism is fine. However, why should people feel so fatigued? So it's the role of the brain is extremely critical, and how brain is processing information. So yeah, no, I think I'll stop talking there. I've been racking on for long. So, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening in and joining us today.
Thanks, Anna. I'd now like to invite Sophie to come back in and talk about how your perceptions during the project have changed and some of the reflections that you found during this process.
Thank you, everybody. In a way, I think it's really the need to unpack and listen to each other and listen to each other's stories. I entered this project. I remember I was interviewed for this, and Anna and Cassie and William said, well, what are you going to make? And I said, I don't know. Because unless I listen to people's stories and I find a way of truly listening to people's stories, then I can't know what I should make. And I'm very lucky as an artist to have had a long sort of trajectory and have collaborated with a number of other extraordinary artists, because it's only through this cross collaboration between Anna and William and scientists sort of saying that we have a hunch that we need to understand, look at this and explore it in a deeper and in a different way than we are able to, and then working with participants, and then as an artist then going out to my team of collaborators and saying, we've got this soundscape and I'm trying to find a way of making these conversations tell a different story, and how can we do that? And this sort of listening to the metaphor around how sound is discombobulated, and it's like tuning into a dislocated radio station, and then that becomes a little nugget of information that then teases out another part of the artistic manifestation of this conversation. So it's about listening and about sharing stories and finding ways to communicate. And this sort of the practice of interdisciplinary work, I think, allows us a much richer conversation. And I'm very excited about this form of work. And I'm really feel that there's the potential that this collaboration between disciplines can take us to a very, very new place. And I look forward to exploring more together in the future.
Thank you, Sophie. We've had a really great question from the audience saying, as a stroke survivor, I can relate to the feelings expressed through the artworks, and it's comforting to know it's not just me. Can the panel offer any suggestions on how I can use the art in practice to help manage my fatigue, and or to explain better to friends and family how it affects me and them? So I wonder if, to begin this discussion, I think everyone could probably contribute in some way to this. But I wonder if we could come to either Sarah or David to talk a little bit about how you feel this artwork might actually help you share your experience with your loved ones and things. I know that other participants have talked about sharing the animation in particular, which we did not show today, with their friends and family. So maybe Sarah, if we come to you first.
Yeah, so definitely sharing all of it, especially ones where you can hear us talking. I found a lot that if it was just me trying to explain something, I wasn't taken very seriously. People didn't understand it. They just thought I was tired and they were like, go and have a nap. Whereas I think when they hear lots of voices, and there's a medical team sort of behind this as well that's looking into it, they sort of sit back and listen a bit more, and take it a bit more seriously, which on one hand is sad that it takes that much to get someone to sit down and listen, and on the other hand it's lovely to now have something to show people, whether it's the artwork or the illustration or hearing the words, that they can sit and have that explanation and hear the other voices telling them as well. In terms of the artwork, what I found, and it could be any artwork, with Sophie we were drawing into the pieces of metal and embossing around the brain, but for me it was just taking that time for myself and doing something that didn't require me to concentrate on anything else, and that just helped me to sort of
Oh, I think Sarah's frozen there, unfortunately. Always the nature of Zoom. But we did get a bit there, so thank you, Sarah. Hopefully she'll be able to join us in a moment. David, would you like to add anything on to what Sarah was saying?
Yeah, I think by sharing the artworks, it gave a way to explain how it feels without being questioned about it. Sometimes when you try and explain to a friend or a family member, because they don't understand it at all, they just say, well, you know, they just question you and say, you know, you just need to rest more, you need to do this, you need to do that, and give you sort of bullet points of how to cure it, which is an impossibility, I think. But by having the artworks, it sort of gave a valid way to show how it feels. So that's the way I think I'd share it.
Thank you. And we do have another question, which is slightly related, but it's around managing the expectations and assumptions of people who knew before the stroke, and you're now, I guess, living with this condition of fatigue, and particularly when it isn't as obvious. Perhaps we'll come to Sarah first. Maybe Sarah, you can share a little bit about how you found that process of trying to get people to understand.
It's been very tricky. Some people have been amazing and, you know, didn't question anything and stood by my side and defended me to other people. And I also have friends that walked away from me. That's very hard to deal with. I stopped being invited to events and parties and birthday parties. Some friends did special things with me instead. So they told me that they were throwing a birthday party, but knew that it wouldn't be for me. And so we had like private, you know, just the two of us, lunches at their house or coffees. And that was lovely that they'd gone to that extra effort. And for those of them that didn't want anything to do with me anymore, I just let it go, because there was nothing that I could do. Yes, there were moments I cried, and yes, there were moments that I was sad, but I had to find the new me, what I call it, and if people didn't like the new me, then unfortunately there was nothing I could do.
Thanks, Sarah. David, would you like to add anything on to that?
I think in the soundscape, Sarah sort of pinpoints one of the key problems was that because you couldn't join in with the party conversations anymore, you just went very quiet. Well, I did, and it sort of looked like you weren't being friendly or being wanting to join in and wanting to be part of things again. So That's one of the issues I found.
Absolutely. We've only got a couple of minutes left. The time is absolutely flown by. But I would like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today, and particularly to Sarah and David for sharing throughout the process, as well as here today, being able to share your experiences. I'm now going to take to Sophie for final words.
No, all I was going to say is that the artwork, including an animation which we haven't shown as part of this, is being launched as a website today that has been put together. So I think hopefully that will also be a tool that other people can use to sort of share and talk around, and the website, the idea is that we add to it and that maybe we also turn it into a live event. So it's an ongoing conversation, and it's an ongoing artwork and research project. It's sort of, I think it's really wonderful when you begin to find these sort of collaborative spaces that we can continue. So even like all the contributors and the people that have joined in and just looking at other people's conversations in the chat, there's some lovely images, not lovely, they're difficult images, but they really help tell a different aspect to that narrative. So I think it's this sort of the exploring these narratives and the reality is the only way that we're going to change the conversation, really.
Absolutely. So this is the launch, and we thought it was appropriate to do it at the UCL World Straight Day Forum. But we do plan to share this artwork far and wide, as we want people to understand that do not have fatigue, just a taste of what it is like, to broaden the conversation and hopefully to help build empathy and understanding, so that people can realize why it's such a debilitating condition. Also, obviously, Anna and William have talked a little bit about the impact it's had on their own research and the direction of their research. So this will be a continuous process, and Anna and William are very enthusiastic to continue this work. So as Sophie's mentioned, please do have a look at the website. Please engage with the artworks and see what's happening there. But there is so many avenues that we can go down, and we would love if you would like to follow along. You can sign up for updates on the website as well, and we can keep you up to date when new artworks are coming about, or if we're running new aspects of the program. So a huge thank you to all of our panel. A thank you to all of our attendees for coming along today. We have recorded the session, so we'll also be sharing that. So if you would like to share it with someone else, but also please do share the artworks as well with your family and friends. And yeah, just thank you very much, and have an excellent day.